So, without further ado, I'm going to bring our final speaker of the evening, who is very high profile in women on the blockchain. She's Jess Houlgrave, and she has an art degree, and she started in the finance industry doing investments. And then one of her techie friends, actually started explaining blockchain to her. And she was instantly obsessed and switched into the tech industry. And she actually decided, being the game changer that she is, she actually wants to influence the future. So she is now COO and co-founder of Codex, which applies blockchain to the art industry, which I think she's going to tell us a little bit about. And also she's another co-founder for the EOS, which is an all-female block producer for the EOS network. And she's also very, very big in female empowerment, and super grateful for her being here this evening. So put your hands together one last time for Jess Houlgrave.
While we're waiting for the second set of slides, I'll introduce myself a little bit. I know a couple of you in the audience. As Susan said, originally my first degree is in economics and management. I did that at Oxford about 10 or so years ago now. And when I was there, I studied and specialized in fiscal and monetary union, the separation of fiscal and monetary union. At the time, I wrote my thesis on why the EU would inevitably collapse, and we're still waiting, but I think we're seeing some signs of it. And so I've always been fascinated with economic systems and how economies outside of what we think of as the normal economy, which is a geographically designed economy, how those economies work. I joined Credit Suisse and spent some time advising UK corporates on equity capital markets and debt restructuring and things like that. And then I joined Ontario Pension Trust, which is a Canadian pension fund. I spent 3 years there managing European private investments into a whole range of companies, right from big multi-billion-dollar infrastructure type things, ports and airports, all the way down to venture and growth equity. And that was the place that I found most interesting, was investing really in entrepreneurs and their ideas. A lot of these were pre-revenue companies. And for me, technology is about people. And so investing in great people who had fantastic ideas and were determined to change the world was the bit of my job that I enjoyed most. And then around 2014, an old college friend of mine and who I had lived with in London was starting to invest in Bitcoin and various other cryptocurrencies. And I had no idea what this was. He was living in Hong Kong, and he asked me for some help structuring the fund that he was setting up. From a legal perspective, and I'd done a lot of fund investing. And so my introduction into the blockchain space was really as a kind of helping hand to set up what turned out to be one of the earliest crypto funds. And as I was doing that, my kind of payment was a kind of small allocation from the fund, which did well, and more importantly, access to the brains that were running it. And within about 4 weeks of that, I quit my job. I quit my job after I had just come back from holiday. I'd taken 2 weeks off over Christmas. I went to India with my mom, and we sat on a beach and talked about what I wanted to do with my life. I said, I just don't want to do this. I want to do something more exciting. And I got back into work with no intention to quit. And by lunchtime, I was like, I'm done. And so I walked into my boss's office, and I just said, look, I'm leaving. And everyone was a bit surprised, particularly my boyfriend when I got home. And he was like, why are you home so early? And I was like, well, I left. It didn't go down great, but I think in the long run, he's happier that I'm no longer doing that job. So that was really, I just decided to jump headfirst into this. And I did that because I was so excited about what this technology meant, from the economics part of my brain through to the investment part of my brain. In so many ways, I was excited about the potential. So I spent a very long time, I think as Natalie said, reading and watching and listening to podcasts and YouTube videos and pretty much anything I could get my hands on and hassling everybody that I could get in touch with. I was fortunate that the people that I'd been working on the fund with were kind of insiders into what was then still a very small industry, and so through them I could connect with other people, and I really came into this with this feeling of wanting to just be a total sponge. I'm not a technical person, but I spent as much time as I could trying to understand the technical side, which I think is really important, and really just trying to learn as much as I possibly could. And one of the things that really fascinated me, and I think this probably stems from being a non-technical person, is how blockchain can be applied in the real world. So, and now I feel a little more comfortable talking about the zero-knowledge proofs and the different proof of work mechanisms and proof of stake mechanisms. But back then, I was still very new, and I really, for me, what this was about was translating the technology into something that was going to change the world and change the people who are in the world right now, not just the small blockchain community, but the community at large. And one of the particularly interesting use cases that I found was this idea of supply chain, of being able to use something like a blockchain to track physical objects as they move through a supply chain. And my personal kind of passion and love is art. I've been working in the kind of art space for a long time, helping friends who are artists, and I'm totally envious as somebody who is non-creative of the role that artists play within society in terms of explaining things and providing a record of our human culture. And so I was particularly interested in how blockchain might impact the art world, which is still niche now, and in 2016 was considered crazy, but here we are. So I spent about a year writing an academic paper at Sotheby's Institute of Art on the applications of blockchain technology for the art world. This is the kind of output of it, although it's been updated with other projects since. It was probably had about half the number of logos on when I finished it in 2017. And it was really an analysis of everything that was happening with blockchain within the context of the art world. And it was super interesting because the art world is a kind of small economy in and of itself, a totally irrational one where people price things irrationally, and where traditional supply and demand curves from economies don't work and don't apply. And so it was a really fascinating space to look at from the perspective of the ecosystems that were being created. And what there was just a ton of different uses and some of the most kind of creative things that when I was going into it, I had never even thought about. And I'll tell you a little bit about the art in a minute, because I think that's kind of some of the most fun things. But effectively, what we found was everything from like using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether for paying for art, all the way through to artists kind of working on it, people using blockchain to secure their intellectual property, people recording kind of title and ownership and authenticity of items using blockchain. And actually what this kind of almost represents is a microcosm of many of the use cases that are now applied more broadly. Walmart is spending $400 million on a supply chain tracking thing for pork products and for food. And effectively that's authenticity and provenance. They're using this tool to track items to ensure that they are what they say they are and where they have been and when. And so this is why I kind of just found this whole space super interesting. But for the people who are, so I'm going to take a little step back now and just talk a little bit more about what Susan was saying in terms of the technical side. And some of this, I used this for a lecture a couple of days ago, so some of it we'll skip over. But this is just a quote from one of my favorite artists who, his philosophy was around this idea that art and digital money or digital currencies can reinforce each other. That we had these artists who were creating digital art, which they were finding hard to support with a value, with a market. And at the same time, we had this digital currency, which we were finding really hard to explain to people. And so how cool if we could bring those two things together, bring the art world and the tech world together with this idea of this kind of self-perpetuation. And then I think there's another quote. No, there isn't. Great. So we can keep going through. So what is blockchain? There is most people, this is, the chart. Thank you. Sorry. Most people, this is where they started hearing about it. By like January of this year, Bitcoin was at $20,000. Cryptocurrency, Ethereum was at $1,200. This is Bitcoin and this is Ethereum in its totality. And so between January 2017 and January 2018, we had this huge increase. And what money does when we see something like this as an asset class expand is everyone just goes crazy. The media goes crazy. The media is going crazy about Bitcoin being used to buy drugs on the internet or to hire an assassin to kill your ex-husband, or all these like crazy things that weren't really happening, but there was so much excitement and everyone wanted to write about Bitcoin and what was happening that we saw this insane amount of hype, which is great because it brings people interested. And suddenly, from nobody knowing really what Bitcoin was here, suddenly we're here now and people actually know what it is. And luckily, the market has calmed down significantly. We're no longer in this state of complete nutter craziness, and the market is somewhat maturing. But this is where most people started. But the important thing is that we can segregate this idea of cryptocurrency and blockchain. And what that means is that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies use blockchain technology, but the technology itself is something separate. And what it is well, let's skip this one. This is something that I use because this is how I eventually got to grips with it myself. And it's pretty basic and not 100% technically accurate, but if you've never seen or know what blockchain is, then this is kind of helpful. So this is the kind of computer that we had when I was a kid, and I used to fight with my little brother to play on it. And basically all it had was some green words on the screen, but it was kind of, it was a computer, right? And if we were to build a database in the way that we all think about a database as recording information, that data would be held on a hard drive that's held in this computer. And so we can access that information. And then the internet comes around. And so suddenly this information, which is still stored on a hard drive, we can connect with another hard drive and we can exchange information between them. But we are still storing information, a ledger, that database, in one place or multiple places, but they are different copies. They're different things. This is kind of where we are now, although I think we're probably like here. And we have cloud computing. So when we have our photographs on our phone, the reason that we can recover them when we lose our mobile phone and log into our Apple ID is because we're using cloud computing systems. So we have our devices are accessing information that's held elsewhere. We are not storing databases on our devices. We're just using them to access information. But this still creates a point of vulnerability, because what happens to this information here? How do we verify it? How do we know that something hasn't happened to it? How do we make sure that it isn't lost? Because there is a single point of attack. And that's where the blockchain comes in. And what the blockchain is effectively the same database replicated over multiple nodes. And we can think of a node like a computer, like one of those hard drives, although in reality now they're much more sophisticated processing units. But effectively what we have is the same copy of the database held everywhere. And so in order to attack it, in order to effectively break it, change the data, steal the data, and to break that chain, we have to attack more than half the nodes on the network. And this is a simple blockchain. Not all blockchains work like this. But effectively, what we are doing is creating a database or a digital ledger where we have recorded information that, because it is held in multiple places at the same time, is secure. And if everybody in this room was a node and just one of you was hacked, everybody else would say, no, we all agree that this is the version of the truth, and the version that you have is wrong. And effectively, that's all that a blockchain is doing, is creating a consensus mechanism by which we can have a version of the truth. And how that works in reality is that we have a single node that is running a blockchain. And a blockchain is just a chain of blocks, quite literally, which use hash functions. And hash functions is something that are super complicated, but effectively the way to think about it is you put some information in the letterbox, and what comes out at the other end is different. But it only works one way. And so if we put the same piece of information in, we'll get the same piece of information out. But we can't go back through the letterbox and see what that information is. It's a one-way hash function. And that means that we can verify information without having to record all of that information. And so with a blockchain, what we're doing is we are adding information into a block and using the hash function to create the next block. So what we end up with is, by virtue of the fact that they're all linked, if we try to change one, in this chain, if we try to change here, everything else is going to change too. And so all the time that we are preserving this consistent idea of what is the truth in the network, we have a secure blockchain. And to give you an idea on something like the Bitcoin blockchain right now, if you wanted to hack it, i.e. to attack more than 51% of those nodes, you would need more than the computing processing power of Amazon, Google, and Facebook combined in order to be able to affect that. So we are talking here huge amounts of computing power that is going to sustain these big decentralized blockchains. And so that's kind of how it works. I'm going to pause there and take any questions if anybody has them around that. And then I'm going to give you some light relief and talk about art. Yeah?
Like a machine. So in regards to data mining, what type of machine would you recommend? What type of processor? What type of
It totally depends on what blockchain you want to mine.
Ethereum. So if it's Ethereum, what type?
I am not a mining expert. I can send you some information on it. I can point you in the right direction. Well, I have I'm part of a group which is an all-female block producer on the EOS network. And there we have a data center that's based in Iceland and another that's in Mexico. So full-blown data centers that are providing block producing nodes to EOS, which is a different blockchain. It's a delegated proof of stake mechanism, so there's a slightly different network. But I can send you some more stuff about what the mining looks like.
I don't think there's any personal computer that can mine anymore. The major public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum. I mean, you need pretty high computing power.
Because that's what seemed like whether it's iCore 7 or the RAM 16, then I saw GPU, and then the other was I got a bit confused. So then they were saying the others.
Yeah, there are people who are still putting like gaming processing units onto Bitcoin, but like it's going to take you so long if you ever mine anything that it's kind of not. The vast majority of mining is now done by professional data centers, for most blockchains anyway. Okay, so let's talk about art. This is the light relief. This is the kind of fun bit, and this is what I'm super excited about as well. And I work with almost all the artists who are shown in here. And what these artists are doing is translating. They are acting as the translator between the technology and the rest of us, for whom technology might seem inaccessible, but if we can use art as a lens to think about technology, it's kind of fun. And so for those of you who know Ethereum, this is Vitalik, who was one of the early founders of Ethereum. And this is a board game called Risk. And Simon Denny created, he's a Berlin-based artist, he created these board games based on well-known founders and people within the blockchain ecosystem as this idea of us all kind of playing with value and creating games using the network. Satoshi Nakamoto is the pseudonymous creator of the Bitcoin blockchain. No one really knows who he is or who they are as a group of people, although many people have a lot of thoughts about it. And so no one knows who they are, but one of the things about Bitcoin is that it was created in the wake of the financial crisis, in this idea of traditional financial systems being broken down. And so this is an image of Dorian Nakamoto, who is one of the people who was hypothesized to be Satoshi Nakamoto, made out of cut-up JP Morgan credit cards. There's a later one, which is an image of Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who's notoriously sort of anti-crypto, and these sell now for quite a lot of money, and they're super, super cool pieces. We next have Bitcoin, which was created by a friend of mine, Sarah, in 2014. And Bitcoin was one of the kind of first ICOs, in a sense. Sarah created her own coin. She issued it. Bitcoin was really a play on this idea of, Bitcoin being a very male-dominated world at the time, and to some extent still now. And what you could do if you bought enough Bitcoins, you could go to her and redeem them for a physical work of her art. And so there's still actually quite a lot of Sarah's collectors now who are holding stacks of Bitcoins in the hope that one day they can redeem them against a work of art of hers. And I have a couple, and they're super cool. HODL has become the battle cry of the cryptocurrency holder. The origins of it are from a Bitcoin talk forum in 2013, and somebody accidentally wrote hold as HODL, H-O-D-L, misspelt hold. What they were talking about was this idea of holding onto your cryptocurrency, because despite the volatility, there was this feeling that they would survive and that the value would go up. And somebody very cleverly returned that HODL actually meant hold on for dear life, which is a pretty accurate representation of the volatility in the space. And this image, I now have stickers of it on my laptop, and has become a kind of, it's based on Robert Indiana's love symbol, obviously. These pictures are by a Scottish watercolorist called Terry Cook, which are some of the more well-known coins in the space. And then we have, can you press and Susan's taking photos. This book, which is written by some friends in London who called Artists Rethinking the Blockchain, it's just gone on to its third print today. And it is a book, really, which I highly recommend to everybody, whether you're interested in art or blockchain or not, because it is, it's essays, it's critical thinking, and it's artists really trying to explore what blockchain means for us. And what it means for us as a society, not from a technical perspective, but in terms of how we're really engaging with each other and what we should be thinking about when we are building these technologies. I'm a big believer that technology inherits the biases of the people who build it. And unless we have sufficient diversity in those people, whether that be geographic or educational or race or gender or whatever you want to say, that diversity is critical to enable us to build the systems that are actually going to work for us all, when right now they're currently failing us. And this is a really amazing exploration of that by some great thinkers in the space. This is an artist called Kevin Abosch, who is super eccentric and is most well known for taking a photograph of a potato which sold for $1 million at Sotheby's several years ago. He also takes photographs of Hollywood stars and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs particularly, and it's just their face with a black background. That's how he kind of became well known. And his latest foray is into crypto. And I met Kevin a couple of years ago, and we were talking about art and crypto right when he was just started. And he issued 10,000 coins, which he calls I am a coin. They are him, I am a coin. And what he did, the smart contract that created those coins, he stamped on canvas in his own blood. So it was this idea that he was really putting himself into the coin and creating those coins out of himself. This is a snapshot of that, and what I like most about it is that it's not just a standalone work, but that he has created all these spin-offs and references to it. And I recently organized a big auction of crypto-themed artwork, and we sold a work that was part of this series where Kevin wrote a public key to a wallet and a private key, and he put it on social media, and the title of the work was "Stealing the Contents of This Wallet is a Crime." And he put 100 coins in there, and over about 5 days the coins got stolen by different people and then put back in the wallet and sent to people as gifts. And the follow-on work from that is a work called The Kidnapping and Crime Scene Investigation, where he follows where all these coins have gone, because he believes they're kind of a part of him. Like most about it is this idea of, what does it mean? What does crypto mean? What does it mean if we are using and representing ourselves with crypto in an immutable ledger that can't be changed? This is now going back to how I'm actually kind of trying to think about the use of blockchain within the art world, and particularly in the context of digital art, which is a space that I find most interesting. We all know which of the images on here are the real Mona Lisa. We know that this is the original, and the fact that it's on a pair of socks or a really lovely dress doesn't devalue the fact that the original work is unique, and this idea of rare and scarce, and there is only one of her, and that's why we value her both culturally and monetarily. But the same doesn't exist, and this exists for physical artworks normally when we can verify which is the original, but the same doesn't exist for digital artists. For a long time, digital artists have been trying to sell works, but really struggled to find a market, because how does a collector know that they have the only one, that the artist hasn't copied and pasted it? And so currently the digital art world is faced with this idea of, which is the original? And if we don't know which is the original, how do we value it? And so as a collector, why am I willing to buy something when there could be unlimited versions of it, and I will never be able to prove which is the real thing? And so blockchain in this instance is a great tool, very simple, and that we can record on the blockchain which is the real one. We can use blockchain technology to create artificially this idea of digital scarcity. In the same way that cryptocurrency is really just a digital representation of digital scarcity using blockchain, we can do the same with digital art. And so over the last year, we've seen this explosion of people buying artworks and paying money, real money, for digital art, because for the first time they can verify that it is just them. And CryptoKitties is a great example of this. Where some people call it art, some people don't. I'm not here to debate what is art tonight, but this is the game that sort of came onto the scene in November last year, and is really what I think has played a huge role in bringing blockchain to the wider world. For Christmas, I gave a bunch of my friends, including my mom, actually, a CryptoKitty. I set them up with a wallet, paper wallet, and that they could attach to. Natalie's got a CryptoKitty. I've got some on my laptop. This idea that we could, create something that other people were kind of interested in. And my mom, who'd never really been interested in Bitcoin or blockchain, was suddenly, had a MetaMask plugin to her Chrome browser and was on CryptoKitties. And it was insane, and we kind of, I think, had to intervene and stop her. But the great thing about it was that people like my mom were actually, they got it. They were like, okay, I can kind of see now what this is, this idea of owning something that's digitally unique and scarce and that I actually have ownership of, was something that was really interesting. And so I think CryptoKitties has played a really important role in doing that. And then these are some of the other great platforms that are out there which are really focused on digital artists being able to create their works, register them using the blockchain, and even monetize them. And that's one of the things that I'm also a massive fan of and working a lot on right now, is this idea of resale royalty rights for artists. Visual artists traditionally don't get any resale royalties in the way that music artists receive royalties for the works that they sell, which actually isn't a legal thing. Here in the EU, we have something called droit de suite, whereby visual artists are actually entitled to a percentage of the profits that they make when their work resells, providing it's within 70 years of their death, and providing it's actually sold within the EU and that they are based in the EU. And so what we have is this situation where thousands of artists are entitled to ongoing payments of their works. And why is that important? Well, if you imagine a young artist from whom you buy a work for $100, maybe you just like the work, but also potentially you're expecting that that work of art will increase in value. But if that artist decides to go and become an accountant, the chances of your artwork increasing in value are very small. And so the role that the artist plays in the continuing increase of value of that individual work is hugely significant. And yet the artist benefits in no way from that increase. And so being able to create new ways of ownership within the art world is something that is, I think, fundamentally going to change the way that artists work, and that the way in which we remunerate artists and hopefully dispel this image of the starving artist, which is ultimately pretty damaging to our culture, because I think artists play a much more important role than we give them credit for. And so using blockchain, this platform Data and Codex, which is my company as well, we're looking at ways that instead of when a work is sold on for the second time, the entire profit going to the first buyer, what about if you have this secondary market whereby the artist can get a percentage of that? And using smart contracts and using the art being bought and sold through this platform, those payments can automatically be made. And so suddenly artists are really able to participate in the upside of the work that they're creating. And then very, very briefly, a few of the other cool things that are happening. Artwork is now really becoming bought and sold through cryptocurrency. This is the first work that was bought by a well-known institution, the Museum of Applied Contemporary Art in Vienna, for Bitcoin, was in 2015, which was kind of cool. And we have, next one, this idea of fractional ownership, which is where I'm going to the second to last thing I'll say, which is this idea of being able to use blockchain to record ownership such that we can break up a single object, whether it's a piece of art or whether it's a company or any other thing which we're talking about tokenizing right now, and actually kind of give you a share in it and enable you to trade it on an exchange. And that's really changing the way that we're thinking about a lot of things like real estate as well within the space. But I particularly like it because I kind of like the idea of owning a small piece of a Monet one day. And then finally, Codex is the company that I'm building right now. We're an open source platform for the art world. We're creating technology for auction houses, shipping and logistics companies, and stuff like that. And I won't really bore you with it because I think the art bit is the most fun. But with that, I would just say, I think, one of the reasons that I am so passionate about this and about art space more generally is going back to this thing I mentioned about diversity and about including people and bringing different perspectives into the space. This technology has a huge amount of power to change the way that the world works, to reconstruct some of those institutions that are currently failing 99% of people. And we all have a responsibility to make sure that that change, the way that we are building things now, isn't just replicating the way that things exist, but is actually doing it better so that it serves all of us. And so that's why we're here tonight. And thank you, Natalie and Susan, for organizing that, because these things are actually a way that some people can get a foot in the door, and that's super important. And please reach out if you need anything, want anything, or I can be helpful. Thank you.